Ever since the state of Arizona passed this new law on immigration reform, we've seen any number of national polls that show that voters support that new law by very, very wide margins. Californians support that law, but by much narrower margins.
If you listen to the political debate, particularly in the big cities, here in Los Angeles with Mayor Villaraigosa, in San Francisco with Mayor Newsom, there's a lot of talk about boycotting Arizona and other things of that sort, so you might get the impression that everyone in California opposes the Arizona law. In fact, the poll finds the opposite, that more voters in California support the Arizona law than oppose it. A lot of them are outside of the major cities or outside of heavily Democratic areas, but still there's substantial support in California for Arizona's immigration law.
One of the reasons that we've seen changing voter opinion on the issue of illegal immigration is because the California electorate is more heavily Latino and more Asian American than it has been in the past, or is the case in other parts of the country. But the biggest differentiator on these questions is not race or ethnicity, it's age. Younger Californians of all races and ethnicities tend to be much more likely to oppose a law like Arizona's than older voters. And my guess, and it's just a guess, is that's because younger Californians have been exposed to a lot more people of a much broader demographic and ethnic range than older Californians have been. And that's gone on to change their attitude.
White voters in California support the Arizona law by a pretty hefty margin. By a very large margin, Latino voters in California oppose it, so do black voters. So the argument about racial profiling and unfair potential discrimination against Latinos seems to be resonating with people in those groups.
Historically, African American voters tend to be pretty hardline on issues relating to illegal immigration. When the question is whether or not to provide services for illegal immigrants, for example, African Americans tend to be pretty resistant to that topic. But the new Arizona law isn't just about security and it's not just about benefits. A lot of African Americans see it as an issue relating to civil rights. And so even though this is a community that hasn't historically been all that welcoming to immigrants, legal or illegal, on this topic they see something a little bit more familiar and tend to be much more likely to line up in opposition to the law.
When we asked people would they consider voting for a candidate who had a different opinion than they do on the Arizona law, what we found was that people who oppose the Arizona law are very firm about that. If a candidate differs from them, they don't want to have anything to do with that candidate. People who support the Arizona law are somewhat more flexible on the issue. It's not necessarily the be-all and end-all issue for them, and they're more willing to consider a candidate who may have a different view than they do.
You know, for all the attention the immigration debate is drawing, not just in the governor's race, but more broadly, it doesn't seem to have made nearly as much of an impact in the voters' decisions as issues relating to the economy and jobs and the budget and taxes. But again, the difference between this Arizona law and other facets of the illegal immigration debate is it really does touch more directly on the question of civil rights. And so a representative of another minority group, even one that may not be as directly impacted as Latino and Latina residents, is much more likely to be sympathetic and therefore that much more likely to be in opposition to the new law.